Picture this. Athens, 450 BCE. The most powerful democracy in the ancient world, the cultural and intellectual center of civilization. Philosophy, drama, art, everything that will define Western culture for the next 2,000 years is happening right here, right now. And in the middle of all this brilliance, there's a man standing in the agora, the marketplace, looking up at the sun, not praying to it, not worshiping it, just looking, thinking, asking questions. And then he says something that will change everything. The sun is not a god. It's a rock. A massive, burning rock hurtling through space. His name is Anaxagoras. And that statement, that simple observational claim, it's going to get him exiled from the city he helped transform into an intellectual powerhouse. But here's what's remarkable. Here's what should make your heart race. Anaxagoras doesn't stop there. He looks at the entire universe and says, everything you think you know about reality is wrong. Matter isn't made of simple elements. The cosmos isn't governed by capricious gods. And intelligence, mind itself, is woven into the fabric of existence. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, another dead Greek guy with weird ideas about the universe. Why should I care? Here's why. Anaxagoras is asking questions we're still grappling with today. What is consciousness? How does order emerge from chaos? Is the universe fundamentally intelligent or fundamentally meaningless? These aren't ancient puzzles gathering dust in philosophy departments. These are live questions at the cutting edge of physics, neuroscience, and philosophy of mind. But more than that, more than the ideas themselves, Anaxagoras shows us what it costs to pursue truth. He had everything: influence, friendship with the most powerful man in Athens, respect, security, and he lost it all because he refused to lie about what he saw when he looked at the sky. He chose truth over safety. He chose understanding over orthodoxy. He chose to challenge the most fundamental beliefs of his society, even though he knew it would destroy him. And you know what? His ideas survived. They influenced Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, every philosopher who came after. They echo in quantum mechanics, in theories of consciousness, in cosmology. 2,500 years later, we're still wrestling with the questions he asked. So today, we're going to explore the philosophy of Anaxagoras. We're going to dive into his revolutionary theory that everything contains everything else. We're going to examine his concept of nous, cosmic mind, and why it changed philosophy forever. We're going to see how his astronomical observations challenged religious orthodoxy and why that matters. But most importantly, we're going to ask ourselves, what would we be willing to sacrifice for truth? What orthodoxies are we afraid to challenge? And what does it mean to live in a universe where intelligence underlies order and everything is connected to everything else? Anaxagoras looked at the sun and saw a rock, but in doing so, he saw something far more profound. He saw that the universe is comprehensible. That reason can guide us, that we don't have to accept the stories we're told just because everyone believes them. That's not just ancient philosophy. That's a challenge to how you live your life right now, today. So let's meet the man behind the mind. Let's understand what made Anaxagoras so dangerous, so influential, and so absolutely essential to everything that came after. This is Anaxagoras of Clazomenae, and his story, it's going to change how you see the world. Let's begin. Alright, let's talk about one of the most fascinating figures in ancient philosophy, a man who literally changed the course of Western thought, and then got kicked out of town for his trouble. His name? Anaxagoras. Now here's what's remarkable about this guy. Born around 500 BCE in Ionia, that's modern-day Turkey, Anaxagoras did something no other pre-Socratic philosopher had done before. He packed up his ideas and moved to Athens. Think about that for a second. Athens wasn't just any city, it was becoming the intellectual and cultural powerhouse of the ancient world. And Anaxagoras? He was the first philosopher to set up shop there and start teaching. But this wasn't just some academic migration. This was a pivotal moment in the history of ideas. For 3 decades, Anaxagoras lived and taught in Athens, becoming close friends with Pericles himself. You know, the guy who basically defined Athenian democracy and culture during its golden age. Imagine having that kind of access, that kind of influence. Anaxagoras was right there at the center of power, introducing scientific rationalism to the very heart of Greek civilization. And here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean dangerous. See, Anaxagoras had this radical idea that the sun wasn't a god, it was just a fiery rock, a massive incandescent piece of metal hurtling through space. To us, that sounds obvious, right? But in ancient Athens, that was heresy, that was impiety. That was the kind of thing that could get you killed, and it nearly did. Eventually, his materialistic explanations, his insistence on natural causes rather than divine intervention, led to formal charges of impiety. He was forced into exile, driven out of the very city he'd helped transform intellectually. You know what this tells us? Philosophy has always been dangerous. The pursuit of truth has always threatened established power, and sometimes asking the right questions costs you everything. Okay, so now we get to the really mind-bending stuff. Anaxagoras looked at the world around him and asked a question that philosophers had been wrestling with for generations. What is everything made of? Now, his predecessors had answers. Thales said water, Anaximenes said air, Heraclitus said fire. Eventually, you get this idea of 4 basic elements: earth, air, fire, water, and boom, that's your periodic table, ancient style. Anaxagoras said, nope, you're all wrong. Here's his revolutionary idea, and I want you to really sit with this because it's genuinely weird. Everything contains a portion of everything else. Every single thing. Look at this slide here. Infinite division. That gold bar you're looking at? According to Anaxagoras, it contains traces of bananas, and rhinoceroses, and your coffee cup, and the stars, and literally everything else in the universe. Nothing is ever truly pure or separate. Wait, you're thinking, that's insane. A gold bar is obviously just gold. And here's where Anaxagoras gets clever. He introduces what we call the predominance principle. Yes, that gold bar contains everything, but it appears as gold because gold predominates in the mixture. The gold is so overwhelmingly present that it drowns out all the other stuff. Think about what this means philosophically. Anaxagoras is rejecting the very idea of indivisible, fundamental elements. He's saying reality is infinitely divisible, constantly mixed, always in flux. There's no bottom to matter, no final building block where you can say, aha, this is what everything is really made of. And here's what blows my mind about this. Anaxagoras is anticipating ideas that wouldn't be fully developed for over 2,000 years. Modern quantum mechanics tells us that matter is far stranger and more complex than our senses reveal. That the universe at its most fundamental level is a churning sea of probability and potential. That separation and distinction might be useful illusions rather than ultimate truths. So when you look at this slide showing dynamic cosmos, this vision of reality as constantly mixed and infinitely divisible, you're not just looking at ancient philosophy. You're looking at one of the first attempts to grapple with a truth that still challenges us today. The universe is far weirder than it appears, and our common sense is a terrible guide to ultimate reality. Anaxagoras knew this 2,500 years ago, and Athens kicked him out for it. Makes you wonder what truths we're ignoring today because they're too uncomfortable, doesn't it? Alright, so we've got this wild theory, everything contains everything else, but let's make this concrete. Let's actually see what Anaxagoras is talking about. Picture this. Imagine a cosmic soup. Not just any soup, but the soup. The primordial mixture at the beginning of everything. And in this soup, all the ingredients that will ever exist are already there, swirling together simultaneously. Flesh, bone, gold, wood, water, fire, thought, sensation, everything, all mixed together in infinite proportions. Now here's the thing, and this is crucial, what we perceive as separate, distinct objects are just different arrangements of this cosmic mixture. That tree outside? It's not fundamentally different from the rock next to it. They're both the same primordial stuff, just with different proportions. The tree has more treeness, predominating. The rock has more rockness, but they both contain traces of each other and everything else. You see what he's doing here? Anaxagoras is telling us that our senses lie to us. We look around and see a world of separate things. You, me, this podium, that wall. We think these are fundamentally different substances, but according to Anaxagoras, that's an illusion. Underneath the apparent diversity, there's an underlying unity. We're all made of the same cosmic mixture, just in different proportions. And look at the second part of this slide, legacy and influence. This isn't just some quirky ancient idea that got left in the dustbin of history. No. This concept laid essential groundwork for everything that came after. Democritus and his atoms. He's building on Anaxagoras' insight that reality is more complex than appearances suggest. Modern physics and our understanding of matter at the quantum level? Same thing. We've discovered that what looks solid and separate is actually mostly empty space, vibrating fields, particles that pop in and out of existence. But here's what really matters philosophically. Anaxagoras is forcing us to question the reliability of perception itself. If appearances deceive us about something as basic as what things are made of, what else are we wrong about? How much of what we take for granted about reality is just mistaken? That's not just ancient philosophy, that's a live question that should keep you up at night. Okay, now we get to the really revolutionary part. Because Anaxagoras has just told us that everything is mixed together in this cosmic soup, right? So here's the obvious question. How did we get from primordial chaos to the ordered cosmos we see around us? How did that soup become, well, everything? And here's where Anaxagoras introduces something absolutely unprecedented in Greek philosophy. Nous, mind, cosmic intelligence. Look at this first point. Infinite intelligence. Nous is infinite, pure, and entirely unmixed. Let that sink in. Remember, Anaxagoras just spent all this time telling us that everything contains everything else. But nous is the one thing that's not blended with anything. It stands alone, completely separate from the material mixture. Why? Because nous has a job to do. Look at the second point. Prime mover. Nous initiates cosmic motion by setting the primordial mixture into rotation. Picture this. You've got this infinite chaotic soup of everything mixed together, and nous comes along and gives it a spin. Literally, a cosmic rotation that gradually causes separation and formation of the ordered universe we inhabit. But here's what makes this philosophically profound. Nous isn't just force. It's not just mechanical energy. Look at that third point. Pure force. Nous is intelligent. It's self-controlling, autonomous, possessing immense power over all things. This is the first time in Western philosophy that someone introduces intelligence as a fundamental cosmic principle. Do you understand what a massive shift this is? Before Anaxagoras, you've got mythological explanations. Zeus did this, Poseidon did that. Or you've got purely mechanical explanations. It's all just water or air or fire. But Anaxagoras says no. There's an intelligent principle governing the cosmos. Not a god in the traditional sense, but mind itself. Rational, purposeful, ordering. And look at this last one. Governor of life. Nous governs all living things, from the smallest creatures to the vast movements of celestial bodies. Everything that moves, everything that lives, is under the direction of this cosmic intelligence. Now, here's what's fascinating, and we'll see this play out in the next slide. This idea of nous will absolutely captivate later philosophers. Socrates hears about it and gets excited. Plato builds his entire theory of the demiurge on it. Aristotle engages with it critically but respectfully. Because Anaxagoras has done something extraordinary, he's bridged the gap between myth and rational explanation. He's given us a way to talk about cosmic order and purpose without resorting to anthropomorphic gods, but also without reducing everything to blind mechanical forces. Mind orders the cosmos. Intelligence underlies reality. That's the claim. And whether you agree with it or not, you have to admit, it's a hell of a lot more interesting than the gods did it. And it's a question we're still wrestling with today. Is the universe fundamentally intelligent? Is mind a basic feature of reality, or just an accident of evolution? Anaxagoras put that question on the table 2,500 years ago. We still don't have a definitive answer. Alright, so we've established that nous, this cosmic mind, exists, and that it set the universe spinning. But now we need to ask, what can it actually do? What are its powers? And this is where Anaxagoras gets really specific. Look at this first point on the slide. Perfect knowledge. Nous possess complete and perfect knowledge of all things. Not just the things we can see now, not just the ordered cosmos we inhabit, but both those mixed together in the primordial chaos and those separated in the ordered cosmos. Think about what that means. Before anything existed in distinct form, before there were stars or planets or people, Nous already knew it all. Past, present, future, all of it transparent to this cosmic intelligence. But knowledge alone isn't enough, right? So look at the second point, cosmic ordering. Nous doesn't just know, it orders. It directs the entire cosmos with what Anaxagoras calls discerning judgment. This isn't random, this isn't chaotic. Nous determines the proper arrangement and motion of all substances with purpose and intelligence. Now here's where it gets philosophically crucial. Look at that third point, immense strength. Nous wields the greatest strength of anything in existence. It has the power to initiate that cosmic rotation we talked about, to transform absolute chaos into cosmic order. And here's what you need to understand about what Anaxagoras is doing here. This is one of the earliest philosophical attempts, maybe the earliest, to explain cosmic order through intelligence rather than mythology. Before this, if you wanted to know why the world is ordered, you'd get stories about gods fighting, gods creating, gods intervening. But Anaxagoras says, no, there's a rational principle at work. Mind itself operating according to its own nature, bringing order out of chaos. This is a profound shift toward rational explanation, and it's going to echo through the entire Western philosophical tradition. Every time someone asks, why is there order rather than chaos? They're walking in Anaxagoras' footsteps. But, and here's the tension we'll see later, Anaxagoras introduces this brilliant concept of cosmic intelligence, and then he doesn't always use it consistently. He'll explain some things through nous and other things through purely mechanical causes, and that inconsistency, that's going to drive Socrates and Aristotle absolutely crazy. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, now we get to the part where Anaxagoras becomes genuinely dangerous, because it's one thing to have abstract theories about cosmic mixtures and mind, but Anaxagoras didn't stop there. He looked up at the sky and started asking questions that would get him exiled. Look at this. Revolutionary astronomy. Anaxagoras correctly explained eclipses through the interposition of celestial bodies. Now, to us that sounds obvious, right? The moon passes in front of the sun, we get an eclipse. Simple. But in ancient Athens, eclipses were terrifying supernatural events, signs from the gods, omens of disaster. And here comes Anaxagoras saying, nope, it's just geometry. One thing passing in front of another thing. No gods required. And he didn't stop there. He argued that the sun is a hot, incandescent metal mass. Not Apollo's chariot, not a deity, just a big, fiery rock. And the moon? The moon is earthy, reflecting the sun's light rather than generating its own. But wait, it gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. Anaxagoras even suggested that there might be inhabitants on the moon in 450 BCE. This guy is speculating about lunar civilizations while most people think the moon is a goddess. Now here's where we need to understand the stakes. Look at that bottom section of the slide. His naturalistic explanations directly challenged religious orthodoxy. And in Athens, that wasn't just controversial, it was prosecutable. Plato's Apology, the dialogue about Socrates' trial, actually references Anaxagoras' controversial ideas. Even decades later, these theories were still being used as examples of dangerous thinking. The tension between philosophy and traditional religion wasn't abstract. It was real, and it had consequences. Anaxagoras was eventually charged with impiety and forced into exile. Think about that. He correctly explained eclipses. He understood that celestial bodies are natural objects operating according to natural laws. He removed supernatural explanations and demonstrated nature's mechanical operations. And Athens kicked him out for it. You know what this tells us? The pursuit of truth has always been dangerous. Challenging orthodoxy, whether religious, political, or cultural, has always come with risks. Anaxagoras paid the price for insisting that we should explain the world through observation and reason, rather than myth and tradition. But here's the thing, he was right. His astronomical observations were correct. His naturalistic approach was sound. And even though Athens exiled him, his ideas survived. They influenced Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the entire philosophical tradition that followed. So here's my question for you. What truths are we afraid to speak today? What orthodoxies are we unwilling to challenge because the cost seems too high? Anaxagoras shows us that sometimes the most important ideas are the most dangerous ones. And sometimes being right isn't enough. You also have to be brave. Alright, so Anaxagoras gets exiled, right? His ideas are too dangerous for Athens. But here's the beautiful irony. Even though the city kicked him out, his philosophy didn't die. In fact, it became absolutely central to everything that came after. Let's trace this legacy through the big three: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Because each of them wrestled with Anaxagoras' ideas in fascinating ways. Look at number 1, influence on Socrates. Now, we know about Socrates primarily through Plato's dialogues, and in the Phaedo, that's the dialogue about Socrates' last day before his execution, Socrates tells this story about his intellectual journey. He says he was initially thrilled when he heard about Anaxagoras' idea that mind orders all things. Finally, someone saying that intelligence, not blind chance, governs the cosmos. Socrates thought, this is it. Anaxagoras will explain how mind arranges everything for the best. But then Socrates actually read Anaxagoras' work, and he was let down. Because Anaxagoras would invoke mind to explain the initial cosmic rotation, but then he'd explain everything else through purely mechanical causes: air, ether, vortices. He introduced this brilliant concept of cosmic intelligence and then barely used it. Socrates wanted teleological explanations, explanations based on purpose and goodness. Why is the earth here? Because it's best for it to be here. But Anaxagoras would say, the earth is here because of mechanical forces. And Socrates thought, you had one job. You introduced mind and then you forgot about it. Now look at number 2, impact on Plato. Plato takes Anaxagoras' concept of nous and absolutely runs with it. He transforms it into his theory of the demiurge, the divine craftsman who orders the cosmos according to eternal forms. In Plato's Timaeus, you get this cosmic intelligence that looks at perfect, eternal forms and shapes the material world to resemble them as closely as possible. That's Anaxagoras' nous on steroids. Plato took the seed of the idea and grew it into a full cosmological and metaphysical system. So even though Plato criticizes Anaxagoras for the same reason Socrates did, not using mind consistently enough, he also owes him an enormous debt. Without Anaxagoras, there's no demiurge. Without Anaxagoras, Plato's entire cosmic vision looks very different. And then we get to Aristotle. Look at this, Aristotle's response. Now, Aristotle is fascinating because he both praises and criticizes Anaxagoras in really specific ways. Aristotle says Anaxagoras was like a sober man among the drunk, for introducing mind as a cosmic principle. Everyone else was stumbling around with purely material explanations, and Anaxagoras had the clarity to see that you need intelligence to explain cosmic order. But, and this is a big but, Aristotle also says Anaxagoras uses mind like a deus ex machina. You know that term? It's from Greek theater. When the playwright can't figure out how to resolve the plot, they just lower a god onto the stage with a crane to fix everything. That's what Anaxagoras does with mind, according to Aristotle. Whenever he can't explain something mechanically, he just says, mind did it. And when he can explain it mechanically, he ignores mind entirely. So all three of these giants, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they're all grappling with the same tension in Anaxagoras' thought. He introduced something brilliant and revolutionary, but he didn't fully develop it. He gave philosophy this incredible gift, the idea that intelligence underlies cosmic order, but he didn't unwrap it completely. Look at this. Materialism meets teleology. That's exactly the tension. Anaxagoras is trying to blend materialistic physics, everything is matter in motion, with purposeful intelligence. Mind orders things for reasons. And that blend? That's a philosophical problem that we're still working on today. Is the universe fundamentally material, with consciousness as an accidental byproduct? Or is intelligence fundamental, with matter as its expression? Anaxagoras put both ideas on the table and didn't fully resolve the tension between them. And finally, look at this last point. Proto-scientific method. Because here's what Anaxagoras really gave us. An empirical, naturalistic approach to understanding nature beyond myth. He said, let's look at the evidence, let's observe eclipses, study celestial bodies, examine the natural world, and explain it through natural causes. That's the scientific method in embryonic form. That's the foundation of everything that comes after. And even though he got exiled for it, even though Athens rejected it, that approach to knowledge survived and transformed the world. Okay, so we've traced Anaxagoras' influence through ancient philosophy, but here's the question that really matters. Why should you care about this guy in 2025? What does a philosopher from 2,500 years ago have to say to us today? Turns out, a lot. Look at this first one. Matter and composition. Anaxagoras' vision of infinite divisibility and universal mixture, everything containing everything else, this actually foreshadows modern quantum mechanics in really eerie ways. Think about quantum entanglement. Particles that were once connected remain connected across vast distances. Or think about quantum field theory, the idea that what we call particles are just excitations in underlying fields that permeate all of space. Or the fact that at the quantum level, the boundaries between things become fuzzy and uncertain. Anaxagoras didn't have the math or the experimental apparatus, obviously, but he had the philosophical insight. Matter is far more complex than appearances suggest. What looks solid and separate is actually interconnected and infinitely divisible. That intuition, modern physics has vindicated it. Now look at the second one. Mind and consciousness. This is where things get really interesting for contemporary philosophy. Anaxagoras introduced nous as an organizing principle, intelligence as fundamental to reality, not derivative from it. And that idea resonates with some cutting-edge debates in philosophy of mind today. There's a position called panpsychism, the idea that consciousness isn't something that magically emerges from unconscious matter, but is actually a fundamental feature of reality itself. Some serious philosophers and even some physicists are taking this idea seriously again. Why? Because we still can't explain how consciousness arises from purely physical processes. The hard problem of consciousness, how subjective experience emerges from objective brain states, remains unsolved. Now, I'm not saying Anaxagoras solved this problem, but he was asking the right question. What if mind isn't just an accident? What if intelligence is woven into the fabric of reality from the beginning? And look at this last one. Cosmic order. The idea that rotation and gradual separation create order from chaos, this parallels modern cosmological theories in fascinating ways. Think about the Big Bang and cosmic inflation. We have this initial state of incredible density and heat, everything mixed together, and then expansion, cooling, separation, galaxies form, stars form, planets form, order emerging from chaos through physical processes. Or think about how solar systems form, rotating clouds of gas and dust that gradually separate into distinct bodies through gravitational forces and angular momentum. Anaxagoras' cosmic rotation isn't scientifically accurate in the details, but the basic insight, that order emerges from chaos through natural processes involving motion and separation, that's actually pretty close to what modern cosmology tells us. But here's what really gets me about Anaxagoras' relevance today. We live in an age where we're constantly told that science and philosophy are separate domains. That ancient philosophy is just historical curiosity with no real connection to modern knowledge. That's wrong. Anaxagoras shows us that the deepest philosophical questions, what is matter? What is mind? How does order emerge from chaos? These aren't just ancient puzzles. They're live questions that science is still grappling with. And maybe, just maybe, engaging with how ancient thinkers approach these questions can give us new perspectives on contemporary problems. Because sometimes the most cutting-edge ideas are the ones that force us to reconsider assumptions we've been making for centuries. Anaxagoras got exiled for challenging orthodoxy, but his ideas survived because they touched something true about reality. And that's the power of philosophy. Good ideas don't die. They evolve, they transform, they resurface in new contexts. So when you're thinking about quantum mechanics or consciousness or cosmic evolution, remember, a guy in ancient Athens was already asking these questions. And even though we have better tools now, we're still working on the answers. That's not a bug. That's a feature. That's what makes philosophy timeless. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about cosmic mixtures and mind, about exile and influence, about ancient ideas resonating with modern science. But let's bring this home. Let's get to the heart of why Anaxagoras actually matters, not just as a historical figure, but as someone who has something urgent to say to us right now. Look at this first point. Intelligence underlies order. Here's what Anaxagoras did that was genuinely revolutionary. He pioneered the idea that intelligence, not divine caprice, underlies cosmic order. Think about what a massive shift that is. Before Anaxagoras, if you wanted to know why the world is the way it is, you'd get mythology. Zeus threw a lightning bolt. Poseidon got angry. The gods had a war. The universe is ordered because the gods decided to order it, and they could change their minds tomorrow. But Anaxagoras says, no, there's a rational principle at work. Mind itself, nous, operating according to its own nature, bringing order out of chaos not through whim or emotion, but through intelligence. This is the bridge between myth and rational explanation. This is the moment when humanity starts to believe that we can understand the cosmos through reason rather than just telling stories about it. And every scientific discovery since then, every time we explain something through natural laws rather than supernatural intervention, we're walking the path Anaxagoras opened up. Do you see how radical that is? How brave? To stand up in a world saturated with religious mythology and say, the universe makes sense, intelligence governs it, and we can figure it out. Now, look at the second one. Courage to challenge. His daring challenges to religious orthodoxy remind us of philosophy's transformative power and the personal costs of pursuing truth against established beliefs. Let's be honest about this. Anaxagoras didn't just have interesting ideas, he had dangerous ideas. He looked at the sun, an object of worship, and said it's just a rock. He explained eclipses mechanically when people thought they were divine omens. He removed the gods from natural phenomena, and it cost him everything. His home, his position, his influence, his friendship with Pericles, all of it gone because he insisted on pursuing truth wherever it led, regardless of whether it contradicted established beliefs. But here's the thing, here's what really matters. He did it anyway. He knew the risks. He understood that challenging orthodoxy could destroy him. And he did it anyway because the truth mattered more than safety. How many of us have that kind of courage? How many of us are willing to speak uncomfortable truths when it might cost us our careers, our reputations, our communities? Anaxagoras reminds us that philosophy isn't just an intellectual game. It's a way of life that sometimes demands everything from us. And the people who changed the world, the people who actually moved human understanding forward, they were the ones willing to pay that price. And now look at this last one. And I want you to really sit with this quote. All things were together, infinite both in number and in smallness. And since these things are so, we must suppose that there are many things of all sorts in all composite products. Anaxagoras invites us to see the universe as a dynamic, interconnected whole shaped by mind, where everything truly contains elements of everything else. Think about what this means for how we live. If everything contains everything else, then the boundaries we draw between self and other, between us and them, between human and nature, these boundaries are provisional. They're useful for navigation, but they're not ultimate truths. You contain traces of the stars. The trees contain traces of you. We're all part of this cosmic mixture, separated by degree rather than kind. And mind, intelligence, consciousness, purpose, permeates it all. This isn't just abstract metaphysics. This is a vision of radical interconnection. This is a philosophy that says you are not separate from the cosmos. You are the cosmos becoming aware of itself. And if that's true, if we really are all part of this interconnected whole, all governed by the same cosmic intelligence, then how we treat each other matters. How we treat the natural world matters. Because there is no other. There's only the cosmic mixture in different arrangements. So here's why Anaxagoras matters today, right now, in this moment. He teaches us that intelligence underlies reality, that the universe is comprehensible, that reason can guide us, that we're not just floating in meaningless chaos. He teaches us that pursuing truth requires courage, that sometimes you have to stand against the crowd, even when it costs you everything. And he teaches us that we're all connected, that the apparent separations between things mask a deeper unity, and that mind shapes it all. 2,500 years ago, a man in ancient Athens looked at the cosmos and saw intelligence, interconnection, and order. He spoke that truth even though it got him exiled. His ideas survived. They influenced every philosopher who came after. They resonate with our best modern science. They challenge us to see the world differently. That's not just history. That's philosophy doing what it does best, transforming how we understand reality and how we live our lives. So the question isn't whether Anaxagoras matters. The question is, what are you going to do with these ideas? What truths are you willing to speak? What orthodoxies are you willing to challenge? How will you live differently knowing that everything contains everything else, and that mind shapes it all? Anaxagoras can't answer those questions for you, but he can remind you that they're worth asking, and sometimes that's exactly what philosophy is supposed to do.